welcome to Think About It. I'm Sylvia Henderson, your host, and I invite you to tune in, take what you see and hear, and, well, think about it. So today we are going to be talking about language, about how we speak and communicate with our words, our voice, how we enunciate, about accents, and the other things that revolve around our speech and our communication that way. And my guest today is a specialist in that area. My guest is Linda Katz-Wilner, and she is a speech pathologist and accent modification coach, and that's all I'm going to say because I'm going to welcome you, Linda, to Think About It.
Thanks, Sylvia. It's great to be here.
And so I always ask at the very beginning of my program, so how did you get to be, let's see, you called you speech and language pathologist. What does that even mean? And you're in business for yourself, so how did you get to do that?
Right. A speech and language pathologist typically works with people, children and adults, who have speech and language and voice disorders. Problems, children who have lisps, who don't start speaking at the right time,
Okay.
people who stutter, people who have vocal problems because they're using the voice incorrectly, or they have a physical problem that affects their vocal cords. And that's what I initially went into the field for, to work in a medical setting. I worked in a hospital, and I worked with mostly adults who had communication problems due to a stroke, neurological problems, head injury, head and neck cancer surgery, and all aspects of voice and communication.
That makes sense.
It evolved into working with professional singers and professional speakers who had problems with their speaking voice. And so I worked with them on their speaking voice with an ear, nose, and throat doctor, and I became more and more interested in voice because I found some people who didn't like the way they sounded. Some of them had a vocal problem. Others had a Philadelphia accent because I was working in Philadelphia. And I was fascinated that, oh, maybe we can modify the Philadelphia accent so it's more mainstream in the way that that person spoke.
Okay, so being from Philadelphia, what in the world is a Philadelphia accent? Because that just sounds normal.
It sounds normal, and it's not as obvious as a New York or a Boston accent,
Okay.
but it's similar, and sometimes the nasality of the voice, that the resonance of the voice or the tone of it isn't as clear, and it has more of that nasal, or at least a New York accent, has more of the coffee, chocolate, closed-off quality, and so they need to learn how to open their mouth more and work on their breathing, and it neutralizes the way they sound.
So if somebody doesn't know that they have an accent or that they have a challenge, we won't call it a problem, a challenge with their speech, how do you get into to help them? You know, it's like, hey, you sound terrible. No.
Okay. First of all, I embrace accents. There's nothing wrong with an accent. I had a very strong New York accent. My concern was that as soon as I opened my mouth, people made stereotypes about me just because I was from Long Island.
Okay.
And I realized they weren't listening to what I was saying, they were listening to how I said it.
Okay.
And so if you find your accent is interfering with either your credibility or that you're talking and people aren't listening to your content, it's going to be a problem. Just like with my cousin Vinny, if somebody travels down and is in Mississippi or Alabama and they have a heavy New York accent, they're going to have trouble communicating or their credibility will be affected.
Okay.
So it's the people who feel that they're in the wrong place with their accent.
Okay.
And so it's not that we want to eradicate people's accents.
So do employers call you? I mean, do people call you and say, hey, so-and-so isn't communicating as well as we'd like him or her to. Can you help them?
I do get HR professionals who are contacting me. You're not going to get that as much for a regional dialect. That's a touchy area. I once worked with somebody from the South who was working in Boston, and he felt that his Southern accent didn't make him sound like all of them. And so he independently worked on it. But when it comes to foreign accents, that's where we see the bigger problem with the doctors or the nurses or the scientists, the chemists, the people who are presenting at technical conferences. And they have a wonderful command of English, but they have an accent and we're not understanding it. That's when I started working with people like that and developing training materials to work with them, because there's some key ways that you can modify the word they're speaking so that they're understood the first time. You'll still know they're from another country, and that's fine, but they need to be understood, and that's when I get involved.
All right, so since my viewers like content, and you just almost opened the door for me, you said there are key ways. So without giving away, what people pay you for, do you have a specific process, or is there something specific that viewers can take away with those key ways?
Absolutely, and I'll give them away. Okay, I'm fine with that. My colleague and I developed a rules approach to accent modification. And what do we mean by that? There are certain rules that native speakers use when we're speaking English that we don't even realize it. So for example, if I say my name, I might say my name is Linda Wilner. I'm stressing my last name. I don't say my name is Linda Wilner. And many people who speak English as a second language don't stress it correctly, so we don't understand them. A more obvious example is when we have abbreviations, such as he's the CEO. Well, you probably don't realize it, but we stress the O. If I said to you, oh, she's the new CEO of the organization, you may not be sure, or you may not be sure what I'm saying. And native speakers, we don't even realize it.
Yeah.
A bigger problem is for doctors or people in the finance field if they mix up numbers. If they say 50 milligrams, and we don't know if they're saying 50 milligrams or 15 milligrams, or 50 billion or 15 billion, there are dire consequences. I mean, in the finance world, it's more money, but in the healthcare world, it's lives. And it's threatening people's safety if the doctor or nurse can't speak in a way that they're understood. So we have rules, and we've developed the rules approach, and we have several products that we've developed, about 11 different products, that help people learn the rules. We even have video lessons now available where there are 12 quick video lessons, and they look at those rules, like the proper nouns, the compound nouns. You probably don't even realize we say laptop. We don't say laptop. Right? Subtle things, but people can make these changes in moments by just learning the rule. And so that's part of our approach.
So I remember when we were having a conversation earlier, off camera, you talked about the 3 V's of communications. Yes. Are they part of your rules?
No, that's something different. The 3 V's. The 3 V's are how we look at communication. We look at communication with the verbal, what we say. Okay. The visual, how we look, be it our body language, how we carry ourselves, also how we dress, but I'm talking more about the facial expression, eye contact, smiling. So we have the verbal, we have the visual, and the third, which is my favorite, is the vocal, because the vocal is, how do you sound? Do you speak loud enough? Do you project your voice? Do you have variety in the way you're speaking? Or do you speak monotone? Do you have too much variety, and that's really annoying? Right?
Or too loud.
Right? Do you have the uptalk? So when you're saying something, your voice goes up, and you don't sound very credible if you're speaking like that?
End of sentences,
right, we have periods, and I tell people, drop your voice. That's what the period's there. Do people pause? The periods are there to stop, as well as the commas. Most speakers will just run right through their thoughts, and they never pause. And so all of these, the pronunciation, all of these, the rate of speech, they're all part of the vocal. And so as a speech and language pathologist, that's what's near and dear to me, to help people with the vocal aspect of communication. So it's not just make it louder when you want to stress, because you'll sound angry. You make it louder and higher in pitch. And so there are ways to master your professional presence by using your voice, and that's what I like to do.
Whoa, okay, so I want to get a little more into detail on actually each aspect of the 3 V's. Let's cover, because I know we're going to take a break in a few minutes. Let's cover maybe the visual first, because that probably is a really reasonably simple thing to cover. What kind of tips, or how do you help people with their visual?
Okay, the first thing, I love the quote, how you stand is how you stand in the world. Right? When you walk into a room or sit down to speak with somebody, you're being judged right away. When you're leaving your car in the parking lot, you're being judged on how you walk and carry yourselves. So the first thing is carry yourself with confidence.
Okay, now
That's
I'm
the
going to be
first thing.
self-conscious.
Now, but not
rigid.
rigid. but carry yourself, because if you're slouched, you don't look as confident. So part of it's the posture. Part of it is even how you hold your head. If I talk to you the whole time and I'm tilting my head, it may look sweet and friendly. Doesn't look powerful.
I've heard that women nod our heads more than men, and it makes us seem less powerful. Is that a true?
I don't know if it's less powerful. Women tend to be more active listeners, and so that's part, we're not even talking about listening, but that's part of listening, is nodding your head without overdoing it.
Okay.
Because overdoing it doesn't seem genuine anymore. But the facial expression, smiling too much may not be good, but you certainly want to be able to smile. You don't want to be frowning, but you want your facial expression to be consistent with the message. So if you're firing somebody, the smile doesn't work. It's okay to have a sad or more serious expression. We all know about eye contact, how important that is, but we don't want to stare at somebody, because if you're staring the whole time, the other person starts to become very uncomfortable. So there's the eye contact. I mentioned the facial expression, the posture, the hands. A lot of people say, I don't know what to do with my hands.
Especially standing.
Right. And the key is, let them just drop by your sides. And the people who feel that they say, I use my hands too much, here's my tip. Hold your fingers together. And even if you're using your hands a lot, it's not nearly as distracting as if the hands or the fingers are flying.
I know some ethnicities, some cultures say, well, I can't think without moving my hands.
Right, and there's nothing wrong with using your hands as long as it doesn't become a distraction. So the rule of thumb is, if you're watching my hands, be it crossing my arms or where I'm holding it, if you're watching my hands, then it's too much of a distraction. You shouldn't be noticing it, but they should be enhancing my message.
Awesome. I like that. And I'm thinking, and we'll get to the other two, of course, but I'm thinking, especially when you're I was going to say non-native American. I don't mean...
Non-native English speakers.
Yes, non-native English speakers. But even native English speakers have issues too. But I'm thinking there's so many things that to think about and to be conscious of. The speaking, and we'll cover more about the vocal in the second half, but to worry about how you use your hands, and then, oh my gosh, am I using eye contact? Am I relaxed?
And
my goodness,
there are cultural differences. So in some cultures, you're not supposed to make eye contact. That's a sign of respect. So people have to code switch with their body language and know that in the workplace in the United States, eye contact's important. Whereas in the Indian culture, a sign of respect is looking away. So part of it is knowing how to switch. And on the flip side, we can be more culturally competent by understanding that some other cultures are not looking at us, not because they don't respect us, but perhaps because they do respect us.
Okay, so you just used a word that we're going to dig a little more into after the break, and that was code switching. So in like 30 seconds, what in the world does that mean?
Code switching is using a speech pattern in certain situations. So for example, we all have our professional voice, how we speak professionally. And then we go home with our family and we may not speak that way. It wouldn't sound right. So we switch depending on the setting to have the professional voice or the social. Think of when you answer a phone. Sometimes you can tell it's a work voice or it's the friend voice. And so code switching is just changing the pattern depending on the environment and who you're with.
Okay, well, we have to take a break. And man, we're going to dig into that a little more because, man, I can identify with the code switching on many levels. So not to dwell on it, but we'll cover that when we come back.
Life's taught me a lot, and I'm ready for more.
Well, you're not the typical kind of candidate that I hire. But you are exactly what I'm looking for.
Your company could be missing out on the candidates it needs most. Learn how to find a great pool of untapped talent at gradsoflife.org.
Hello, welcome back to Think About It. And I'm still Sylvia Henderson, your host. And my guest is still Linda Katz-Wilner. And we have been talking about language and speech. And I love it. Linda's 3 V's for communication. The verbal, I had to write it down. That's why I'm looking down. Verbal, visual, and vocal, the 3 aspects of communication that you actually cover. When we took a break, you had just mentioned something called code switching and did a very elegant job, I thought, in describing what that means. So I just want to dig down into that just a little bit more, because I think so many people, especially in jobs or in the work environment, have to, quote, be a certain way or speak a certain way at work or professionally. And I've had to do this myself, and then when they go home or when they're around their friends, they can speak more like when they grew up or where they grew up. I encountered that a lot when I grew up, because African American, urban, inner city Philadelphia, inner city anywhere, I learned to speak the way all of my peers spoke. But then when my parents were teaching me to speak, to get along in the business world, as they said back then, my peers used to ask me, why you talk so white? Because they equated good speech or clear speech with ethnicity. How do you encounter that with other cultures or other people?
I do, and I do even with African Americans, who they may send somebody to me because they want to polish the communication, and it's a touchy area. And in fact,
I would think.
In one instance, it was because this person was working with somebody in Scotland, I think it was, and they used that as the excuse that your manner of speaking wasn't polished enough for somebody from Scotland to understand your English.
Whoa.
But when I worked with him one-on-one, he was really clear that he just didn't have the polished English that he would have liked. And he said, why didn't I get this when I was in school? And he didn't. But it's never too late. But then we talked about that, and he was very open to learning to speak a certain way, so it was more polished. So I do encounter that.
Okay.
In the Baltimore area, I've encountered that because there are regions of Baltimore have
Yes.
typical accents.
Yes.
And somebody came to me and didn't want to sound like she was from East Baltimore, because at meetings they'd stop and say, oh, you're from Dundalk, aren't you?
And what does that do to people's perception?
Right. And she said they didn't see me as the professional
Yes.
that I was. Well, when she went back to be with her single friends when they went to the bars on the weekends,
That's right.
they said to her, you too good for us now?
That's okay.
And she said, I like this way of speaking. I don't want to go back.
Okay.
So some people choose to be very fluid and change the way they speak. And in other situations, they like it so much, they don't want to go back. But there are repercussions of both.
Yeah, yeah. Yes, there are. And I found that it wasn't. So I always thought it was an African American thing that you had to switch back and forth. I called it the language of the street, capital, for Wall Street, versus the language of the street, small letters
Interesting.
for the hood, the street. A lady came up to me one time during one of my presentations, and she said, that's not just for African Americans. She said, I work in D.C. When I go home to the Midwest, to my farm community, she said, if I speak there the way I speak in my business in D.C., they would think I had you're all that now.
Right.
So
There
I
are
thought,
issues.
I never thought about that.
When you change your vocal patterns, there are issues. Even if you're changing somebody's voice, if somebody speaks like this all the time, and they want to get away from that because that is not a good way to speak. That's that fry voice.
Okay.
And they change it. Sometimes you have a little resistance because that person, when they change it, is going to be perceived differently by their peers or their colleagues. And so there's some resistance in making those changes because you're not fully comfortable changing because that's your identity. You're used to speaking a certain way,
Okay.
and you have to get to a point where you either embrace it or you're not going to make that
Okay.
change.
All right. So let's go back to, you mentioned your 3 V's, and we talked about visual and how some things affect how people perceive you, which I like that thinking. It's how people perceive you, not how you are, essentially. So you mentioned verbal and vocal. in my mind, verbal and vocal are the same because they involve the voice.
Okay.
So what's the
Interesting.
difference?
Verbal are the words that you use. So verbal could be, are you speaking succinctly? It could be, is your grammar correct? It's the words. It could be, do you talk and never get to the point, well, which is the succinct. So that's the verbal. Like, what are the words that you're actually using? Do you speak in idiomatic expressions, like I threw them under the bus? Do people know what that means? That's language. Verbal is more language-based.
Okay.
All right. Vocal is the voice, how it sounds.
Oh, okay.
So the verbal is what you say. The vocal is how you sound.
All right. So that sounds more physical.
Yes. And that's why, as a speech pathologist, that's near and dear to me because I can help change that. So is the person breathing correctly? Do they have enough breath support behind their voice in order to project their voice? Do they articulate clearly enough, or are they mumbling?
Okay.
Or do they have an accent? That may come into play. Do they, as I mentioned a moment ago, do they speak at the bottom of their range? And if they're doing that, that's a problem. And do they have energy in the way they speak?
That's true.
Energy that we're all looking for to be dynamic speakers is more the voice than it is just the words or just how you look. And these 3 V's have to all be in alignment. When they're in alignment, you're credible. But you could have a beautiful voice, and you can say all the right things, but you don't carry yourself well. And then there's that disconnect.
All right.
Or you can look great, you can say all the right things, but you have this either an irritating voice, the way you're talking, or you're speaking so quickly they don't understand you. That affects the balance. So my goal with my clients is to make sure that the visual, the vocal, and the verbal are all balanced. So there's no confusion, and I know I'm getting the real thing.
So do you specialize in a certain industry? We mentioned earlier doctors and getting the prescription right. Is there any industry where your work is even more needed than others, if that made sense?
It's interesting. I put two professions together, and that's doctors and priests, or clergy, because they're the 2 professions that are authority-type positions. And people don't say, I don't understand you. People are intimidated and don't say that. And so those professions don't always have that reality check. They say, everybody understands me. Nobody tells me there's a problem. So doctors and clergy are 2 groups that I do a lot of work with. STEM professionals, the science, technology, engineering, math, the people who are in the sciences often are coming from other countries. So we have a lot of STEM professionals from China, a lot from India. And so if a company has a lot of STEM professionals, I have an upcoming class with an IT department. Because there are a lot of people there who are not American born. And so those are a lot of the professions or the areas that I do a lot of work in.
So considering, so we're on the East Coast in the Washington, D.C. area. I'm thinking the Mid-Atlantic area on the East Coast and the West Coast, the technology areas, we're used to people from all over the world, and all over the United States being here. Do we hear things, I don't know, more efficiently, or do we have a better ear than, say, other regions of the country, without stereotyping, who aren't quite used to the multiculturalism?
That's an excellent question. I've worked with doctors who worked in a New York hospital. One doctor came to me, and she said, I was working in New York hospital. My accent was never an issue. And then she went to, I think it was Iowa, worked in a hospital there, and she said, all of a sudden, nobody understood me.
Wow.
And part of it is the diversity in large cities, where we hear accents, we go into the bank, wherever we are, we're hearing different accents, so our ears are more in tune to it. In rural communities, they may not have as many, they may not hear as many accents, and so it's harder for them when they have a doctor coming into the region, or priest coming into the region, or something like that.
Okay. And so what do you use to help people with their accents?
Oh, okay. Well, what is an accent? Let's just talk about that.
Because to me, I don't have an accent, but people say, where are you from? You don't sound like a native Washingtonian. And I'm thinking, what does a native Washingtonian sound like, and what do I sound like?
And so when we look at accents, there are three main areas that we look at. We look at the consonants, the pronunciation of the consonants, which is more so in foreign languages, like saying this instead of this, or saying supervise instead of supervise, because the person may not have those consonants in their native language. So part of it's consonants. A bigger problem is when it's the vowels. So if I say, where do you live, instead of where do you live, all of a sudden we may get confused. Or if I say something about a nurse says something about your heart, and I'm hearing it as hot, all of it. So vowels are a bigger problem. And the third issue are the rhythm patterns, and we spoke about that already with the rules of learning the rhythm of American English. So rather than eliminate accents, I don't focus on eliminating accents. I focus on learning the American accent and the patterns of the American accent so that people are understood.
So do you have tools or something to help people do that?
I do. My colleague and I have written several books. One book is the Rules Approach to Accent Modification. And that's what we talked about.
So it covers exactly what we talked about.
And that's exactly it. And we have some charts of the 12 most popular rules that people can learn. The other part, and this was actually earlier that I did these first, I have books for medically speaking, accent modification for the medical profession. So this is a systematic way to go through the pronunciation, the stress patterns, the vowels, even learning the idioms so that people can master the American accent and communicate effectively in the workplace.
And then, my God, the rules of English and all the things I think oh my goodness.
And when we learn them, we realize why it's so difficult for people, because there are so many inconsistencies in the English language.
So this goes so quickly. So I'll give you a chance for a little bit of shameless self-promotion. You know, do you specifically handle a one niche or a certain area? Do you have certain kinds of clients? Who are they? How do they reach you? That kind of thing.
Well, the best way to reach me is through my website. And that's the successfully-speaking.com.
And that's been showing on the lower third. So.
And people can contact me for a 15-minute free telephone consultation where I can just answer some questions. I run master classes in public speaking, so if people are interested in that. I have materials on the website. Some of them are free videos, other ones you can purchase videos. And I have a series of modules, Master Your Professional Presence, which people can purchase, and it's a self-study. I do one-on-one coaching. I go to companies to work with people. I run workshops at companies.
My goodness, what do you do in your spare time?
This is what I love to do. I love to, well, we all communicate. And again, my passion is helping people communicate effectively. And it all started as a speech pathologist, because you're helping people in need. And now I've transferred that into helping people just be as good as they can possibly be. And a lot of it comes down to communication.
Last thought, quick thought you want people to leave the program with?
Just remember to balance those 3 V's of communication: your visual, your vocal, verbal. And once they're balanced and they're polished to the best that they can be, you're going to come across in a very powerful, confident, and polished way.
Perfect. Linda, thank you so much for being on the show. And I invite you to join me on Think About It for future episodes. I hope you got the message and you heard the message about communicating effectively, and especially, I love the verbal, the visual, and the vocal aspects of your communication. So with that, I wish you a great day, and until next time, take what you see and hear, and, well, think about it. Make a great day.